I have a pot rack project I'm just starting on. The client wanted a chasing Repusse poofy chicken as an ornament on the top of it. So rather than take the time to try to draw a chicken, I went to Google image search and found an image that was satisfactory to them, scaled it up to what's going to be appropriate for the position on the pot rack, printed off right and left forms, because this will be three-dimensional. The two sides will be lined, given the volume, and then welded together so that they'll have some thickness. The material is 16 gauge, and you notice here that when I store my scrap pieces away, I usually take a Presto pen and write the gauge on the piece so that I don't have to get out a thickness gauge every time I want to figure out what material I'm using. I'll go ahead and cut this out fairly close to the line with a throatless shear. Probably won't really finish the foot detail with chasing, but this will probably be a solid rod that comes out of this, and it doesn't look very promising at this stage, but usually finishes up pretty nice. But this gives an example of I quickly separated the two pieces with a torch, and the obvious effect is you're going to get some loss of your pattern through the heat transfer. These are just stuck on the sheet metal with the rubber cement, and even if you use a spray adhesive, which fixes it a lot stronger, you can still always get it off with the torch heat or putting it in the coal fire. Well, I've made some progress on the Hollowform roosters that are going to go on this country style pot rack. We've made all our drawings and gotten all the measurements and everything, and I'll next be making the hoops and these two decorative motifs. To review, I started by just finding an image on the image search, printing them in front and back halves. I'll give you the reason for that a little bit later. And cemented them on the 16 gauge sheet with rubber cement. Then I used a throatless shear to cut it out. Pasted one rooster on the face and one rooster on the back. This is not going to be a highly detailed piece of chasing work. It's more folk art rather than nice Repusse. And by having the two images opposite each other, I don't have to spend a lot of time striking the face to transfer the line to the back. I can just use the other image to know where the front lines are. The roosters, when they're finished, will have a light brass brush finish similar to the double pot hooks. So we'll talk a little bit about actually chasing the lines. I use a work light to see when I'm actually at the pedal hammer, but for the purpose of explaining and filming, I'm going to turn that off. While the metal is still flat at the stage of the cemented images, I used two different radius tools to chisel that line rather lightly. And then when I had what I thought would be just enough detail, move to the next step, putting in the volume, and we'll go to the fly press to show that. This is my pedal hammer that I use frequently to do this sort of work. To put the volume in the piece, I use the fly press. I'll just check. This is about a 11/16 ball. It's probably metric. Use Ray Carpenter's handy dandy blacksmith's micrometer to check dimensions in the forge room frequently. So it has a lead block underneath it, and after you work just a little bit, the cavity is going to correspond with the positive radius of the top tool. And I'm doing this kind of pseudo randomly. I want it to end up with a appearance on the front side that more or less resembles the feathers. And it can be done cold, and the 16 gauge is very thin, easy to work. It's been annealed earlier. And I didn't have to remove the paper because just that process of stretching makes the paper peel off anyway. Then I'll have to move to some stakes to refine that a little bit by hand. And probably after that stage, I'll use a torch or the coal fire to heat this up and anneal it again so that we don't get cracking from work hardening. So as luck would have it, I couldn't find a concave stake that was suitable. So we quickly used a piece of 1-inch square bar to forge the 7/8 tang, and then a large ball peen to make the face of it concave. Then I can use a small rounding hammer here to start working on that edge. I want that edge to come up to just about 90 degrees. So the two faces going together will give me maximum width of volume there. Then for areas that don't correspond to round but needs more linear tool, I set up a little V-block in the vise so that I can use sort of a Warrington style hammer to sink the volume for the legs. And these will then have a piece of probably 1/4-inch round rod welded to the inside, and then I'll make the feet out of that so that I have a little bit more solid mass to attach the rooster to the edge of the pot rack rail. This is a fabrication technique which speeds the joining of the two sides of any poopy hollow form like this. I'll take the MIG welder and a piece of 1/4-inch round rod, coming inside the perimeter of 1/4 inch or so, tacking it in place. And then I'll just use torch heat try to follow the line. Might have to use a scroll plier or bow plier or something from time to time because I can't isolate the heat well enough all the time. At this point, I just have to kind of get in the ballpark. I can always go back and adjust it a little bit. I could be MIG tacking it in place at each point. That would be easier to do, perhaps. But I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to just cut that off. So now I'm going to get the MIG welder again. I'm going to tack this in a couple of places. I would eventually work my way all the way around the perimeter, laying down this seam reinforcement.